Hello, today I want to welcome you to our group, Veterans in Conversation, brought to you by the Power of Our Story and facilitated by Barry Zworestine, combat medic from the Rhodesian Bush War and currently a psychologist in Australia, and retired United States Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Scott Duncan. My name is Sarah Carell, founder of The Power of Our Story, and we are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. With that, I will hand it over to you, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And also just a massive thank you for all your generosity to this tribe and making this one of the many meetings that happened during the week. You really hold us together in the most extraordinary way. So many thanks for that. Scott, good to have you back. Scott's been
You
away,
back, brother?
just a short time abandonment, but it's really great to have you back and great to have. I mean, this is a meeting today, a gathering today, a conversation between brothers. Us men are the old grey ones, as you can see. And I always think there's something very powerful, cleanly shaven, but still there's whispers of grey on the top, my friend. But still very powerful to have conversations with people that have walked for many long years on the earth and gathered the wisdom and the pain and transformed that into what I hope today we're going to share are some very powerful aspects that people struggle with in transitioning. This conversation is not so much about looking backwards, but about exploring how where we were in the past informs, inhibits, or supports us to grow in our journeys forward. So I thought what we could do today is I'll start off. Well, if people can just introduce themselves, I think that's a really good idea. And then I'd like to read a bit of an introduction to Chappie and to Rich. And then we can jump into the conversation. All right, so Chappie, just a bit of a background on you, and then maybe you could even just talk about your past, introduce yourself, which would be great.
Sure. My name is Todd Stewart. Everybody calls me Chappie. I am an injury retired firefighter from the city of Federal Way in the state of Washington. My time in service was quite a long time ago in the early to late 80s. Uh, my career ended with a severe back injury in a house fire due to a collapsing stairway. Um, Spent literally decades in a very dark place, very alone. Uh, Survived two suicide attempts. The second one being in 2020. And at that moment, due to the love and friendship of a friend, I sought and received the help that I needed. And in 2021, I got my certification as a chaplain and realized that that was the calling that God had been equipping me for all those years in the dark. And since then, now I work with a terrific organization called the First Responders Bridge, and the organization that I'm certified through the United States Chaplain Task Force. I've been a member of the Power of Our Story tribe for, wow, I think it's almost 5 years now. Um, and I have found this to be just an absolute blessing in my life and really something that really helps me stay in the light. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Thanks, Chappie, and some great themes that we could begin to interweave as we get into this today. Rich, good to have you on board, brother.
Thank you, brother. Rich Oakley, um, spent 30 years in law enforcement. Uh, 15 of those years were undercover. Um, I carried a lot of trauma. I started in 1967. I had a kidnapping in 1968 as a rookie police officer, and And some attempts on my life with DEA. Um, I carried the trauma with me for decades. I started to take high risk uh, undercover operations that other people were turning down because I knew the pain was so bad that I figured, well, let me go out as a hero. You know, that way that there's no uh, problems from my family. They won't think that I did it on my own. You know, he was working undercover and they got him. You know, so law of averages. But that's it. And now I'm trying my best to do whatever I can to help others so that they don't have to walk down that trail that I did.
Thanks, Rich. And you also have such a profound and deeply moving story, and it's just such a pleasure to have you and Chappie here today as well. So thank you. And Scott, seeing as you've been away, an introduction, my friend.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Scott Duncan. I'm a retired Marine. Did 21 years in the Marine Corps, combat vet. Um, got out in 2012, got into the veteran space, helping veterans transition from service, getting training, and then placing them in jobs across the U.S. in the renewable energy sector. I've been with Power Story. I guess it's getting close to 5 years now as well. It's hard to believe. But yeah, love this group of people. It's very dynamic. Uh, a lot of different folks doing a lot of good stuff under the leadership and the gentle hand of Sarah. She's done an amazing job, as you mentioned from the beginning. I really think if it well, I don't think I know if it wasn't for what Sarah's put together and her staying the course with all of us in all these different directions that this thing is growing into. It's pretty amazing. And so I'm very thankful to be part of the tribe here.
Thanks, Scott. And just briefly, I'm Barry Zworestine. Scott and I run Veterans in Conversation. I'm a product of the Rhodesian Bush War in the mid 70s, 1970, 76, 77. I was a fighting medic working in four-man sticks, and probably the same issue with Rich is that so little was known in our generation about impacts of operations and how it can trail you forward into the rest of your life. And so I think many of us have had this problem where things began to happen, cracks began to appear, we weren't really tracking them, and then our capacity to move forward and operate effectively, both with a map and an internal compass, was really very thin on the ground. I think between all of us, over time in which we've had conversations and got to know each other, the theme which I'd like to explore today and then see how it expands outwards is we first started talking about, and Chappie and I were talking about aloneness. And as I explored aloneness and certainly talking to Chappie, the aloneness is at two levels. The one is disconnection from tribe, and that can be as a result of moral injuries or impacts of operations and what happens within that. But also there's an aloneness in which we disconnect from ourselves, where we start to do high risk things because we're refinding ourselves in a way which is self destructive. And I know, Rich, that you just spoke about that one. I think also with that, and as I said, moral injuries comes the whole concept and the challenge of shame. And depending on the moral injury, or even Chappie, you spoke briefly, and we can really explore that of self shame, not feeling good enough, being shamed by perhaps what we've instigated, or being shamed by institutions or organizations that we are within. Then, with the lead in with that, is also where we begin to isolate within ourselves, so in the disconnection, as well as isolate from our tribe and others that care for us. And then finally, I think the challenge is how do we arrive and how did we arrive back where we can sit today with the wisdom of our pasts and the strengths that we gathered from that and the values and the attributes that can help others stuck in the darkness of that place and help them to know that there is a way to come forward. So, on that note, Chappie, would you like to lead in? Because I know we delved into this briefly in a conversation recently, and you brought up such valid points. and then we can just ride on each other as the conversation evolves.
Yeah. So, you know, the road that I took to that complete isolation really started in childhood for me. Um, in my chapter of Wounds to Wisdom, the first Wounds to Wisdom book, I made this statement that it was a perfect setup. And by what I meant by that was I was the need and the desire to serve was really instilled in me from the time I was very, very young. Uh, my grandfather was a King County sheriff's deputy. He retired as a captain. My dad followed him into that service. He was also a King County, Washington sheriff's deputy. And so I grew up around these heroes. And really, I mean, you talk about hero worship. I growing up, I wanted to be like my dad and my grandpa, and I would have done anything to follow in their footsteps. And at about 6 years of age, my dad was suddenly no longer a part of the family. There was some infidelity there, and mom and dad were divorced, and suddenly my hero was no longer around. And being that young, you don't know how to process that as a child. You tend to start blaming yourself for why your hero is gone. And so growing up, I that desire to follow my dad and my grandfather, as I came to find out later on, had an aspect to it of that 6-year-old child who felt like dad's gone because of me, and I need to do everything I can to win him back, to make him proud of me. And so at 17 years old, I became a firefighter and became the third generation of my family to serve as a first responder. And right from the very beginning, I started to experience highly traumatic incidents. A month after I joined the department was a suicide call of a boy that was 2 years younger than me. And I met his mother around the side of the house as we were going in. And I can still see that woman's face as clearly today as when it happened well over 30 years ago. And the reaction of my station lieutenant when we got back to the station, when I expressed to him how effed up that was to look at me right in the face. And it's a cliche today, but he said the exact words, "Suck it up, rookie. The next call is coming and I need you to be ready when it happens. So just forget about that whole thing." And that started me down a path of pushing things down, hiding the impact of what I saw, and the people that I lost, the people that I couldn't save. I spent 3 years living in a fire station, and I calculated it out once. The 3 years that I spent as a resident firefighter was about equivalent to 8 years of being a career firefighter on a regular shift, because I was at that station 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So whether I was officially on duty or not, I was responding to those calls. And then suddenly it was all gone. We responded to a split level house that was nearly fully involved. And unbeknownst to us, the stairway going up the stairs was severely compromised. And as I went up the stairs, as the second nozzle going in, the stairway collapsed under me. And I fell up to my armpits and was hung up in this collapsed stairway with my legs and my feet burning up, and my back feeling like it had an ice pick in it. Two of my brothers from Engine 4 came out onto that collapsing stairway and saved my life. They pulled me out and pulled me up to the top of the stairway. And when it was all done and over with, and we're outside, my station captain, Steve Turcott, he looked at me and he says, "Man, are you all right? What the heck happened?" And there I am, nearly unable to stand the pain that I was in, looking him right in the face and saying, "I am fine." I was so terrified of losing my career as a firefighter that I hid the injury. I came to find out decades later that I had actually fractured my back at the time and never had it treated. It was a compression fracture of my L5 vertebrae. And so about a month later, I realized that I couldn't do it anymore. If I had a brother in the same situation I was in, I wouldn't have been physically able to save him like they had saved me. And so I made an excuse about it being hard to get on. I was at the time part-time firefighter. So I made an excuse about I'm gonna take some time and do some other things, and all the time thinking that this back injury was going to get better. I was going to get back on the department, and it never happened. And that's when things really started to spiral downhill for me. That childhood need, that thought that being a firefighter was what I was, it was in my DNA, took over. And I felt like I had failed to uphold my family's legacy. I had failed my father, and I had failed all of those people that I couldn't save. And they visited me at night. Um, I called them my dead. My dead came to visit me in my nightmares. And a young girl in particular, she came to visit me all the time. She died in a head-on accident with a drunk driver. And you can't see it all, but that picture right there that I had Invader Girl paint is a vision. Oh, over here is a vision that I had from my nightmares of me holding that girl. That's what that painting is. And so after years of my dad visiting me, not wanting to sleep, I started using methamphetamine and marijuana to just numb the pain, keep me from sleeping. And I became a absent husband, a non-existent father. And in 2003, I spent a night on the floor of a drug house with my Colt Combat Commander in my mouth. At that point, I had been completely isolated for years. I was present with people, but I was completely alone. And that was how I wanted it. I was worthless. I was a failure. I let all those people die. I let my family down. And, a Colt has about, well, my old Series 70, which at that point it had probably 20,000 rounds through it, had about 4 pounds of trigger pull. And I tell people that I'd probably used up 3.5 pounds of that when a sudden vision of my 4 daughters came to me. And that's what kept me from using up that last 8 ounces of trigger pull. And I decided that I couldn't kill myself because my daughters needed my money. They didn't need me. They didn't need her father. Wasn't worth a shit as either one, but they needed my money. And so I made a decision at that point to not take my own life until they were grown. And so I spent the next several decades completely alone. By that time I was divorced, pretty much estranged from my daughters, and spent the next decade with my suicidal ideation on the back burner. That night was the last night I used methamphetamine, but I smoked a lot of dope. It was the only way I could sleep. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, the riots, my law enforcement family was being murdered. It all came back again, and I realized that my daughters were grown, and that's what led to that moment again, with the gun in my lap in the cab of the truck in the parking lot of the place where I worked. And but all of that, all of those years, the one thing that was a constant was isolation. Isolation from anybody that cared about me. Isolation, my isolation from my own consciousness of anything that was good. I had made a determination a long time ago that God was punishing me for all of my failures, and that's why I was going through all of this. My dead were still visiting me regularly when I hadn't completely numbed my brain with cannabis. Um, and 2020 was, oh, I can end this now. I can stop what's happening. And I'm going to pause my story there in 2020 with that second suicide attempt. And then we can come back to it and talk about my journey to where I am today from there, because that's really that's the story I want people to come away from with, is the good that happened from that, the purpose that I realized was behind all those years that God had for me. So I'm going to pause my story there for now.
Chappie, thanks, brother. All I know for me is that your story has always had the most profound impact. In many ways, you triggered that whole idea of the depth of aloneness, that kind of pain that is almost etched into our souls and our bones. And that image of you sitting alone, with a weapon by your side, is something that lived so powerfully in me that in many ways it became the the trigger for the book I'm writing now on aloneness, because I feel the depth of aloneness and the pain of aloneness, and how many people are sitting so disconnected in the darkness of their rooms and their souls. You also bring a depth of understanding to how our early beginnings inform the choices we make. And in many ways, we are a generation of suck it up, of men that suck it up. We don't touch our feelings. We encapsulate. We push things down, and then decisions are made from there. That sense of failure, when we're not meeting up to the expectations, the story we have on who we need to be as protectors, and what happens when we feel we fail ourselves and we fail others. The estrangement that you talk about from family, it probably is something that connects a lot of us together. Certainly connects me very deeply to you. I know what that experience is like. So, Chappie, thank you. You leave us with such a powerful sharing of what lies within you, and I'm sure it echoes into so many people sitting out there at the moment that are stuck and incredibly lost. So let's just hold that, and I'd like to just move on to Rich, and then we'll start to interweave the themes that are coming up as you guys are sharing the stuff that you faced over the period of your lives. Rich.
Thank you, Barry. My isolation actually started in my childhood. Uh, I grew up in a house where the basement was a dirt floor, and we were very poor. So, going to school, I never had some of the nicer clothes that the other kids had. So I would stay off to myself. I didn't have friends, many friends that I didn't have anyone that I could say was my best friend. And and then when my dad passed away when I was 13, I went off the rails. I mean, I started skipping school. I just, I wasn't interested in anything. I had made a promise to my mom that I would never drink, and I never kept that promise. But anyway, fortunately for me, I had a couple of police officers, local police officers in town, who took me under their wing and would give me a ride home from school if I missed the school bus because of playing football or track and field, whatever. And and I got to, they became like an extended family for me. My grandfather became my father figure. I grew up in a family that were a long lineage of patriots going back to the Civil War. So uh, for me to go into um, my dream job was law enforcement. For me to go into that uh, was a dream come true. However, along the lines, I also felt some guilt and some shame. I said, you know what? I broke that chain of military service in my family, and and that haunted me for, and it does occasionally now too. Because I said, wow, you're the one that broke that chain, and then there were others after me that went on to serve. A buddy of mine who was a Marine, my first partner, he was a Marine in Vietnam, and or no, and actually another guy that I worked with, he passed away. But I had said to him one day, I told him that story about breaking that chain, and he looked at me and he said, "In my eyes, you served, and don't you ever forget it." And I said, "Wow," right? So um, then, as you know, Barry, in the '60s, there was nothing available for us who were suffering from any kind of trauma. Uh, I remember my dad. My dad, when he got out of the Navy, he got hurt in the Navy, and so he became an alcoholic. I mean, he was out with a few friends, and they were drinking that cheap Muscatel and stuff like that. And he would, every once in a while, he would try to come by to see me. And I remember my mom's oldest sister, my aunt, uh, taking the kitchen broom and running him off. Wouldn't let him come to see me. So that hurt me. So then I go into law enforcement. Um, and in 1968, like 6 months out of the academy, I had the kidnapping, and the people they were actually planning on killing me. And the, uh, one of the guys that was part of the kidnapping I think he got scared and he started to try to convince them that that wouldn't be the right thing to do. So after that, we go to trial, and I had some bad advice. I was asked by the my agency, "Did you have your weapon with you that day when you were kidnapped?" And I said, "No." They said, "Well, that's uh, a fireable offense because you're on probation. We had a year probation." So he said, "You might want to rethink that." And I knew what that meant. So when I go to the grand jury, I said, "Yeah, I had my weapon, you know." Well, now when it comes time to go to trial, I have four defense attorneys that are hitting me. Once I did the direct examination, now I got four attorneys that are after me. And first time in my life ever in a courtroom. And these guys are hitting me, and they're hitting me hard, and a couple of times I'm yelling at them, you don't know what you're talking about, and stuff that you normally shouldn't do in a courtroom. I found out later. But and then the case was finally handed to the jury, and they go out, they deliberate, they come back. Maybe I think it was maybe 5 hours, and they come back, and I hear the judge say, I understand that you have reached the verdict. Yes, Your Honor." And and what's that verdict? And they read not guilty on all counts. And it was like somebody had just kicked me below the belt. I mean, all the air, all the life just went out of me. And I remember I sat there stunned. I left there and I went out to a local bar and I sat there. I think I got out of court about 5:30. I went to the bar. I think I left there about 2 a.m. when they closed, and that was continuous drinking, continuous drinking by myself. Uh, then I come to find out the department's thinking about firing me, and here's my dream job going down the drain. But one of the defense attorneys, in fact, the one that was the hardest on me, wrote a letter to the department. It said, if you go after him for not having his weapon, I will defend him at no cost. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was really a shocker. Anyway, a group of guys, local and city, county, decided to throw uh, a dinner for me, like a support dinner. So I had police officers from all around coming in that night to support me at at this dinner. People got up and said things, about me and stuff. And then I stayed with the department for a few years after that, and I uh, I was approached by some people from the county. They were looking for an undercover person to do some work for them. Now, back at that time, the 60s and 70s, you didn't have a lot of uh, African Americans in law enforcement. You know, uh, for some reason that people felt that you were a turncoat, you were a traitor. Others just didn't want that. In fact, I I think I told you before, one of my father's sisters called me up when she found out I was going on the police department and said, "I'd rather see you be a garbage man." And I was like, wow. So, um, so I go to work for the county, and I took a leave of absence for 6 months. I go to work for the county, and I liked it, so I stayed. And my starting salary at the police department was $5,000 a year. So by going with the county, I got a $5,000 raise. So I said, "Wow, this is great. You know, I'm a big time now." So I took that job, and then while I'm working that job, some people, some agents from DEA come down to the county, and they're looking for somebody, uh, African American, to work undercover. They had a couple of big cases, and so the my department said, "Well, if he wants to go, you can have him." And so I went, and I worked with them probably 5 or 6 months doing strictly undercover, nothing else. In fact, I had no cover. At the end of the night, I would go to a local detective's house and tell him what I had, and he would then the next day get pictures together for me so I can identify these people. I would pull out a match book cover, and I had all little notes on it about descriptions and stuff, and places, right? And so I go to work for the DEA, and I started out in New York, and then I got transferred to Newark, New Jersey. I was in a I was in a lab group at that time. We had uh, no none of the gear you see today. We had no gloves, no masks. We just were in there among uh, P2P and all these other volatile chemicals, and nobody thought anything of it, right? So then from there, I went into the task force, which is made up of DEA agents and local cops. And then I became the first training coordinator for DEA for the state of New Jersey, which means I put on local courses for state and local police, week-long courses for them, or 2 weeks, actually 2-week courses. And and then I went back to my undercover role, and that's when I was working a group, actually two groups, one in the night and one in the early afternoon. And this one particular group was selling $40,000 worth of heroin a day. And I'm talking in the 60s, uh, 70s rather, or 80s actually. So um, people started, the crowd, some of the other drug dealers on the street started to be concerned about me. So what we did was the police department, I was working Newark Narcotics. They would become my backup team. Great guys. I loved them all. And so they said, well, here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow, you drive your undercover car up by the bar, and we'll have a black and white pull you over and then arrest you. So I said, well, that sounds cool. So I cruise up to the area, and here comes this black and white, lights on, pulls me over, and they go through this little search process, and they handcuff me, put me in the car, and they drive away. And then another cop drives my undercover car. The people on the street knew right away that there's something wrong, because if you get arrested, they're going to tow your car. They're not going to have another cop drive it for you. So they followed, this one guy followed the patrol car and saw them drop me off at the federal building. And he told his boss, he told the head of the organization that, hey, that guy that we're dealing with is a Fed. And and he said to his boss, he said, well, what are we going to do? He says, you need to kill him because he's the only one that can testify. So I go back a few days later, make another heroin purchase, and then he tells me they have a uh, a sample that they want to give me later in the afternoon. So I rushed back to the office. I secured the heroin that I just purchased. I gave my guys a quick brief. I get in my undercover car and I drive back to the bar. He's standing on the corner. He gets in the car and he's starting to give me directions. But as he's giving me directions, he's asking me, you know, how is that dope that we delivered at McDonald's? So he's trying to make sure he's got the right person. And so we get to the park. He goes down an embankment. He comes back and he's got dirt on his hands. And he says, come on, it's over here. And I knew I had a problem. I said, you have people here? No, it's cool. It's down here. So he goes down the embankment. He thought I was behind him and he turned and And that's when I saw that nickel-plated 22. And the first round went past my ear. The second round misfired. I wasn't armed, so I took off running, and he was right behind me, firing all along. Um, so then that went unresolved. That trauma went unresolved. We apprehended the guy that tried to kill me. He got 10 years in prison, federal prison. But I carried all of that with me. And then I had a betrayal. I had a girl working for me when I was secretary of the career board. She got a bad evaluation, so she would go. Uh, and I blame upper management for part of this too, because as a quasi military organization, there is a chain of command. She would never go to me and say, I want to go talk to so and so. She would just go on her own. And she would go up to the deputy assistant administrator, the person right under the administrator, and tell lies. And so one day, I'm sitting in heading a career board meeting, and uh, midway through, they said, Rich, can you step out a minute? I said, sure. I knew something's up. So I stepped out, and then they finally called me back in, and they said, we're going to transfer you to San Francisco. I had been there for 4 years prior. So, and then one of the guys said, uh, he just lost his younger brother. His mother's not dealing with it well, and you're going to send him 3,000 miles away. It doesn't make any sense. So they said, well, we'll send him to New York. Well, I didn't take that well. So I went down to see the personnel person, and I said, how much would my pension be if I were to leave today? And he said, I'll run some numbers for you, but go home and think about it. Don't make a decision now. And so I did. I went home that Monday morning. I came back and I said, uh, what would it be? He said, if you go now, you're only going to lose 5%. I said, well, 5% is nothing compared to the aggravation that I would have been going through just to make that move. So uh, the head of the department, the human resource, sends me a letter, a demand letter. I want you to go and see this therapist. We had an in-house therapist because you're not handling this well. And I said, well, I'm not going. She said, no, you're going. You don't have a choice. So I went there, and of course, the therapist said, well, why don't you just take the move? Just take the move. Don't worry about it. I said, no, there's a lot more behind this and then she said, well, why don't you go to the career board and see if you can get uh, a postponement or whatever. I said, no. I said, I've been on the career board, and I'm not taking my clothes off for those people because I know how they act. I've seen them destroy people's careers in those meetings. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so, of course, I continued on with my intimate relationship with Johnny Walker Red and Jack Daniels or whatever else I can get my hands on. Sometimes going to work uh, after being out all night. One night I came home and I put my gun under a sofa, and the next day when I got up to go to work, I didn't know where it was, so I went to work without it. And then it wasn't until later on that that evening that I realized, oh shoot, the gun is under the sofa cushion. Uh, so so I left the agency not on my own accord, which really hurt me. I remember the deputy administrator calling me up to his office and saying, well, what are you going to do? I said, I have no idea. This wasn't planned for. I have no idea. And he said, wow, okay, well. And so I left and continued on with my drinking, not knowing what I was going to do or where I was going to wind up. there was shame. Was I a failure? All of those things running through my mind at the time. One day I got my gun and I got in my car and I was driving to a location and I thought about my mom and that's what turned me around. I said, she just lost my brother and all this other stuff and I can't do it. Um, and so in 91 when I was in headquarters, that's the first time I was able to get some counseling. And I'll never forget when I was getting ready to walk out of the office, the therapist said, she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "You're a good man, Rich Oakley." And I lost it. And she said, "What happened?" I said, "I haven't heard that in years, you know. And and then finally, uh, I call it providential. I'm on LinkedIn one day and I see this young lady named Sarah Carell. And I said, hmm. So I sent her a message and I told her that I wanted to send her an article about the assassination attempt and a challenge coin, and I sent it to her. And after that, uh, we started communicating. She said, but you ought to come on and tell your story sometime." And she said, "Just come on for a while and just sit there and listen and see what you think." And so that's what I did. That was in 22, July 7th, 1922. Never forget it. And when I made that connection. And then eventually it got to the point where I said, "I'm ready. You know, do you want to record?" I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, let's record it. And so then I told my story, and there were, I think Chappie was there. I don't know if Scott was there, but it was the first time I had a chance to unload that because I was ashamed, you know, telling people, about what happened to me. You're afraid to seek counseling because, oh, well, we put him in the rubber gun squad or whatever because he you don't know how he's going to react. And so then after that, telling my story, I got more and more interested. Sarah started, pulling up, throwing little breadcrumbs out, and you know, and how would you like to do something on your own? This or that. So uh, she supported me. She gave me a lot of support, and I truly appreciate it. And then the tribe has really given me a lot of support. In fact, you guys keep me going every day now. So I appreciate that.
Rich, I haven't heard a lot of that story. You and Chappie, and it just sits so deeply in my heart. I mean, that the struggles, I mean, both of you, I think all of us, the struggles of trying to regather the pieces of ourselves. And Rich, even, when I left Rhodesia and arrived in South Africa, it was apartheid times in the early 70s, which shocked me. I arrived and there were planes with whites only, blacks on
Mm.
this side, separate entries into pubs. You had to carry a pass. I mean, I'd never, as I've said, if you and I had walked into South Africa at that time, or even if my wife and I had gone in and she's a dark Brazilian, we would have been arrested.
Yeah.
So I really feel for you because that was a lived experience that shocked me profoundly when I entered South African apartheid times. The moral injuries you describe from your organization, where your organization literally became the enemy, that I think has the most eroding impact almost on the soul. It leaves us hollowed out because it actually offends the trust and the values that we commit to when we do enter service. Um, it was profound, Rich. I mean, I'm almost lost for words about the weight that both you and Chappie have had to carry. And it's certainly a weight that I'm very aware of. I often say the first 60 years of my life were at war. And well after, 47 years after my war, I was always at war. Three immigrations, no, five immigrations, two marriages, stack it all up. Um, I wasn't drinking. As you know, I was running. I think I was
Mm.
actually trying to kill myself running further and further away and finding peace in an illusionary way that was self-destructive.
Mhm.
So we've all desperately tried to find our healing in things that weren't nurturing our souls. And when you brought up the fact of somebody putting their hand on your shoulder with that beautiful affirmation, it brought back a memory many years ago where a friend of mine, because like most of us, we never talked about our service. I
Mhm.
don't even remember being at service. And she said to me, "You must have really suffered." And I remember my heart breaking just to hear somebody reflect that and see that within me. It was like the vulnerability and the pain became visible and held with compassion by another human being.
Yeah.
So, brother, thank you. What an
And
extraordinary journey.
my uncles, they never talked about the war. I had one in Korea during the Frozen Chosen. I had uh, 4 or 5 in Europe during World War II. My dad was World War II, Navy, but nobody ever talked about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Scott, what's come up for you as I mean, you have a long journey in service, and we've all spent a lot of time together, um, the
Yeah,
three of us.
I think that really both stories resonate. I mean, we've all served, right? We spent a lot of our years in service, and so listening to the background stories here, you can see a lot of yourself and the stories that are being told. Uh, both Chappie and Rich talk about being isolated as a young kid. That's where things started. And I mean, I can absolutely connect with that. Very same story with me when my folks split up when I was young. Uh, my grandfather being my father figure, Rich, he was a Marine, served in the Second World War. Incredible man. Very, very fortunate that he was in my life as a young kid and young man. And the thing that I see in both of you guys that I also see in myself is that the untruths can become truth in your mind because you know, looking at it now, because we've all had time to digest and reflect, and things have happened to us that have brought us to where we are today. And we can see clearly now that the things that we did with intention to do our jobs were good things, right? And so those things didn't not happen. They absolutely happened. So they're true. But when we start having problems and we start to, fail in some areas, that's when, somebody's poking in the back trying to tell you you're worthless. You didn't do a damn thing. You have no accomplishments. And those are the things that stay at top of your mind because they're trying to get into your heart, and that's the bad guy trying to make all that stuff happen. We just don't see it for what it is at the time. We blame ourselves. And sometimes there is blame, but that's when at some point we come to the rationalization and hopefully we reconcile that, right? And hopefully we have the time to do that. And both of you guys have been blessed with that. And I feel that I have as well. And that's so essential to, healing internally. And then just like Barry talked about, Rich, when that pat came on the back and those words were uttered and they were real, and then that's a reminder, wow, okay, there are folks that see me, they care, and yes, that's a truth. I am a good person and I have done well. And so, yeah, these stories, the empathy that can really only come, I guess, with going through life, right? Going through experiences, so you can share and in the heartfelt stories that are being offered here. Um, And then the last thing I guess I want to say, and this is for both, you and Chappie, is your service is absolutely that. Service to country comes in many ways, right? I mean, it's obvious that if you're in the military, that's service to country. If you're in the police force, if you're a firefighter, that is service to country because country starts at the grassroots level and it's taking care of your community. Without the community, you don't have the family, a nation, and you need people at that level doing the things that both you guys did very well. Without that, is there a need for a military if you don't have folks every day living and breathing the profession of firefighters and policemen to keep the order that's necessary for, a nation and a nation like ours that's done so much good. Yeah, I mean, we've had issues over time, right? But if you look at it, I think America's done a pretty remarkable thing in the history of the world. And so, yeah, thank both you guys for what you've done because now your stories are gonna enable and God has put this group together to do exactly that, to tell the stories so that people can hear and then realize, holy smokes, okay, man, that really sounds a lot like me. I need to hear more about this. So thank you both for what you're doing now. Thank you for your service, but thank you absolutely for what you're bringing to the table now because it matters.
Thanks, Scott. And Sarah, I'll come to you in a second, but I think what I love about the four of us is we have, if you add up all the years, there's several hundred years that we've been living on the earth together, accumulated. And there's a wisdom. And I think the collective weight of the wounds that have made themselves visible today is so important because how many people are sitting alone and disconnected, feeling, look at the things we've worked through, all of us, and still haunt us, perhaps in many ways to the day. Shame, imposter syndrome, um, that sense of not feeling good enough, the moral injuries, the loss, the grief. These things still live with us today. And I think in many ways, they're the parts of us that when we work with, keep us connected and keep our hearts open, but I think also offer a wisdom and a light to those that haven't yet trekked. They stuck in that dark space. They haven't even got close to feeling a hand on their shoulder, telling them, "You're okay. Join the tribe where this lives deeply. You are not alone." And so sitting with the weight of that, I think probably one of the, and today it was really raising the weight, but looking at, so what happened moving forward? It's our book that all of us are co-authors in. They're the wounds which live deeply today in the conversation we've just had, but it's that story into the wisdom. And it's the learnings that we can bring to light today that those listening can go, I'm not alone, and okay, I understand where I'm at, and there's a tribe that I can belong to. So that pivot back in is to the tribe. And, I think if the four of us, five of us, Ulrika, and thank you for being here today. Um, Sarah, we are here today by virtue of the generosity that lived in your heart. You had a vision, and that vision has provided a return to tribe where people can re-find a sense of belonging and understand that they are not alone in the suffering and the shame and the grief that has haunted them for most of their lives. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about what you've heard today and just that opening of your heart when you felt such a pull to start this tribe.
Oh, thank you, Barry. Scott and Barry, thank you for doing this, by the way. Thank you for hosting. I think it's really great to have you guys with your life experience and with the way that you can articulate the journey also, just being here to facilitate a group like this. So thank you so much for that. And then Rich and Chappie, thank you so much for sharing your stories again. They are huge. Hearing stories over the last 5 years consistently, like hundreds and hundreds, you do see patterns Every story is so unique, it's different, but you see these overall patterns of how people heal when they are willing to take that step of courage and come into a community and sit there and be present for somebody else's story until they're ready to tell their own. So it has been an absolute honor and privilege to hear people over the years start that journey and just see them blossom, like see all the next steps that people do. Whether it's just staying on here and doing a lot of things off, Zoom, or staying here to really support other people in this process of sharing their story. And that's where to me, it just made sense. It was more intuitive with me. I believe it's a spiritual principle that the more that we get things out and we do it in community, then we develop, rich connection and we heal in healthy community. So to me, it was kind of taking the spiritual and the intuitive into wanting to create a platform of safety with no judgment. But it's exciting because I'm constantly researching. Um, there's so much data out there that confirms that when we release our stories, there is a holistic healing that gets ignited. Mind, body, soul, spirit. This overall healing that starts, like something gets kind of unleashed. And so the science says that even just journaling, like physically writing stories, it starts that process. But then when you sit with supportive people, other people that are validating your experience and they get it, they're with you, they are supporting you, there's a deeper anchor into that healing. So to me, it's an incredible honor to see humans that were suffering in silence and that have served to protect us. Like you all are people that have served to protect us in dangerous jobs. And to me, it is an honor to be able to protect on the backside. I feel like, and this is a different conversation for another day, but I do think that civilians, I feel like it's a duty to figure out how you can serve our protectors, um, protect them too. So yeah, that's what came up for me when you asked me that question, Barry.
Thanks, Sarah. And again, thank you, because I think in reconnecting into tribe for all of us, we begin to refind ourselves. I think as men, we have walls around our hearts, and vulnerability and our grief is not easy to get close to. Rich, you're in your 80s, Chappie, you're in your 60s, I'm in my 70s, and we're still chasing those walls that are still around our hearts and allowing them to become visible both to ourselves and to each other. So in tribe, we begin to slowly, brick by brick, we take it down. Before we move on to, let's push the time today because I think there's something so powerful in the discussion we're having, if everybody's cool with that. Um,
Yeah,
Ulrika, yeah, Chappie, are you?
I just didn't want to let this end without me continuing.
Yeah, because I want to go
Uh,
that route now. Because now we need to take the next step, and today is really this is an extraordinary for me, an extraordinary conversation with three brothers and a similar chronology. And there's so much that has been learnt, and to stop it now is stopping something powerful from happening. It's the light we need to move into. But Ulrika, is there anything that has come up for you as you've sat with us today that you want to raise before we move into that next part of the journey?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I've just stepped out of a demon seminar where I feel like this is such a place. I always describe it. I feel like the hero in these positions in these careers between the hero and the demon becomes very washy. And for some reason, I'm like, I look at the things that you guys say about just the things that come up in the sense of, wow, I didn't follow in the footsteps. So I'm already thinking like, wow, this starts without any consciousness. You already, it's been decided for you long time before you will ever understand it. Um, that kind of makes me so heavy, where I think like, wow, there's not even anything of you in that choice to begin with. What I think is beautiful when I look at the both of you, when you share, is it feels like you have shared this story. You can feel the power by sharing it. And at the same time, and of course, that's just my fantasy of how I receive it. But there seems to be like, of course, with every time sharing something so vulnerable, there is this moment of like, I hope I'm safe with that. And I feel like this is the ultimate journey that we all have to find a place and we have to facilitate a place where people feel safe enough to dare to share something that they've ashamed of, that they think they should be ashamed of, something that they've been hurt by or they think they've hurt others with, and to make a physical experience that they're held in that. That nobody's going to switch off the screen and say, screw you, but actually they're going to say, you know what, let me put my hand on your shoulder and say, hey, you know what, you're an amazing guy. So I think that's what I've seen. That is what I'm taking with me to say these places are so important, where everybody who has been taught so much to not share anything and keep it inside, that they get to have a chance to make this experience in their body that says, hey, there is something different out there. And it's not going to be one time that it's going to convince you, right? So you have to hopefully make this more and more times to see there are people out there that actually are proud of what you did and that see the light that you have despite all the darkness that we all have. And so I'm glad that Sarah and Barry and Scott are doing this for all of us to kind of facilitate the space of, hey, we see you and thank you for showing this moment of vulnerability and having this, am I safe? And that's what I feel.
Thanks, Ulrich. And I must admit, when I was hearing you, I thought, what would it look like if we all gathered today in one space physically? And in that moment, we held each other physically. Because that's the peace we can never replicate as we face each other across the oceans or, the distances that lie between us. There's a lot that we heal, even in this group. But what would it be like when we face each other across a room? It would be,
And the interesting part, just to say that because you say this, I feel like everyone connected to this moment that you shared because I feel everyone felt this hand on your
mm,
shoulder or on
mm,
your own shoulder. That's how strong this is when we also like touch someone, right?
mm,
Physically.
mm. So, the wisdom of our wounds, Chappie, in keeping with the book that we committed our stories to, that Sarah authored, um, how did you move forward? Where was your healing, brother?
Well, first off, I hope Canine Pharaoh in and out of the picture isn't too distracting. When I'm going to tell my story, he will not leave my side. He's that intuitive. He knows, he can sense. I don't know what it is that comes off of me, but if I'm going to be telling my story, if I tried to put him out of the room, he would take his big bony head and smash it open. So, uh, so he's here, and then of course, if he's here, then Miss Layla has to be here too. Um, so I'm gonna go back shortly into the dark. Um, that at the very last stanza of the poem that I wrote called "Suck It Up." which is based on that painting behind me. It says, every night I stared into myself, the eyes of my dead staring back at me. My own death was there, looking out from the black. I should have died in that fire, I said to the demon. Don't worry, he answered. We'll take care of that soon enough. That was where I was that night in 2003. And Barry and I had uh, messaged Barry because I was thinking about today, and the unprocessed trauma didn't come up as much for me as the moral injury did. Most of it um, manufactured by me. Um, the moral injury of the sense of failure, uh, the sense of having this belief that fulfilling my family's legacy and becoming a first responder and serving in that way was literally in my DNA. Third generation, that I was born to do this. And when that was just gone, all of a sudden, that combined with and I think firefighters and EMTs, paramedics, um, we have this thing about forgetting all the people that we saved and being unable to let go of the people that we could not save. And that's where my dad came from. Those people that I couldn't save, and especially that very young girl, visited me every night and told me what a failure I was. And that was, I think, the biggest sense of moral injury that I had. And so I lived with that for all those decades. And and in 2020, just the whole thing that was going on with society, it was just everything was just absolutely batshit crazy. And my family, uh, my law enforcement family, my dad and my grandfather were both cops. Growing up, every King County Sheriff's deputy was my uncle. I mean, I was, and so that just started compounding and compounding, and the realization that my four daughters were now grown. Uh, I was done with God punishing me for being a failure. I was done with every time I went to sleep, one of my dad coming and telling me what a failure I was. And so I was in my pickup truck, and I was in the parking lot at work, and I had my sidearm was out of its holster and sitting on my lap, and it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. And as I'm getting ready to put an end to all this, my phone rings. First God thing that happened that day. And it was my friend Barry, or Brian, excuse me. um, and I had met him. He ran a business that I worked with the company that I worked with, and he was a retired corrections officer. I answered the phone. I don't know why, but I did. And he said, I love you, right? He said, I'm seeing some stuff that scares the shit out of me, and I want to know what's wrong. He didn't ask, are you okay? He said, I know something is wrong, and I need you to tell me what it is. God put his hand on my shoulder at that moment and said, tell him now. And for the first time in over 30 years, I told another human being what was going on the first time I had told anyone. Not my wife, not even my kids, no one. And so the first thing that came to my mind was, wow, okay, someone gives a shit. And so there was this little speck of light that in this place that was so completely black, the realization that there was one person on this planet that cared what happened to me. And I had never been able to get my mind to go to that place. God didn't even care what happened to me. And so after I was done unloading all of that on him, he said, I love you, brother, and I'm not going to lose you, and I need you to get help. And so I made a very solemn promise to him that when I hung up the phone with him, I was going to get help. And so I work for I'm an IT guy. That's what happened to me after I left the fire department. Um, so I'm in the parking lot and I call my company's employee assistance program. Now, one of the things about being isolated from your tribe. So when I left the fire department, that was it. I was out of the brotherhood. But that complete and total lack of trust of anyone who hadn't experienced what I experienced was still such a part of me. And my first thought as I'm dialing the phone number for the employee assistance program was, this is never going to work. When I get done, I don't care who the therapist is. When I get done with them, they're going to need a therapist. There's no way they're going to be able to deal with the stories that I'm going to tell them. And so I told myself, you promised Brian, make the call. And anybody who's dealt with an EAP, it's a complete crapshoot. And so here's where the second God thing happened that day. I called them up and they arranged for me to meet a therapist, and they told me his name was Peter, and I said, okay, whatever. And they knew, I told them where I was, and they said, we're going to get you in to see him tomorrow. And so I walk in to his office the next day thinking, this is just useless. This is not going to work. There's no way on earth this guy is going to be able to understand what I went through. And I'm not even listening to him as he's talking about, introducing himself. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute. Did he just say he's a retired cop? The basic throwing a dart at the wall to pick your therapist resulted in me standing in the office of this guy, Peter Cade, who was not only a minister, but a retired West Des Moines police officer. And it was then that I really started to understand that God's hand was at work here. I understood that, yeah, what are the odds? And so I thought, okay, maybe he will understand. And so we spent the next 3 sessions with me just unloading, and he said, okay, I need you. We need to make this official. I need you to go and I'm going to refer you to this psychologist, and she's going to there's a battery of tests that's put together by the DSM, and she's going to put you through them and interview you, and then she's going to diagnose you. He says, I predict that she's going to diagnose you with complex PTSD and hypervigilance. And that's what happened. And then he introduced me to Jill Shirley. Now, both of these people, Sarah, you'll probably remember from the Wednesday night that I read my chapter, because they were both on with me when I was there. And Jill Shirley is an amazing trauma therapist, and she specializes in EMDR therapy. And I started to process those traumatic events. And I think the one thing that really surprised me the most, because as soon as I heard I was going to get this stuff called EMDR, I immediately jumped in and started, looking at it, and it seemed kind of voodoo-ish, with this, what's all this about, not understanding exactly what's going on with your brain, with that binary stimulation and all. But the thing that really surprised me was when she started questioning me about what she called negative core beliefs. And that was really where the important stuff came out. The shame, the failure, the worthlessness. And then we started digging. Where did that come from? Where did that originate? Why is it that you were so convinced that being a firefighter, being a first responder was what you were, was what you were made up of? And we started going back further and further and further, and we finally meet that 6-year-old boy whose hero had gone away, and who absolutely couldn't live without the love and respect of his hero. And that was that perfect setup that I talked about in the first paragraph of the book. And so there I was, all this knowledge that I didn't have, all this realization of real things that had happened and real experiences that had led me to the floor of that drug house in 2003, to then decades of passive suicidal ideation, waiting for my girls to grow up, and then to the cab of that truck. And I couldn't believe it. I had a logical path that I could follow from where I had started out to where I was sitting in Jill's office. And that light had started to grow and started to grow. And as we processed more and more of that trauma, and I started to be in a parasympathetic state more often than I was in a sympathetic state. I probably had toxic levels of cortisol in my blood for decades. I mean, I don't even want to think about what the long-term physical aspects of that are, but so I started having a calm mind, as much as, and then eventually more than, I was in that sympathetic state where I was just absolutely unable to think. And in early 2021, I went to a 3-day retreat in Columbus, Ohio, by this organization called the First Responders Bridge. And that was amazing because that was the very first time that I ever heard my brothers and sisters tell their story. And there's one guy there that he was a firefighter, and I was just absolutely floored at how many things that he talked about were my story. And it was there that I realized that I could have a tribe again. That I didn't have to go this alone. And that weekend was a huge turning point for me. And now I have this is my 4th year of being a chaplain for the First Responders Bridge. And then I'm still trying to remember, Sarah, who it was that connected me to you. I I don't know. It may have been you reaching out to me.
I don't remember. I don't.
Yeah. And I was
Scott.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
fingers up.
that first time that I joined, and I was hearing again, just like when I was at the First Responders Bridge Retreat, I'm hearing these people tell their stories, and I'm realizing that has to feel really cathartic for those people to tell their story and not be afraid to. And so eventually I got to a point and I told Sarah, yeah, I'm ready to tell my story. And I spent half of it blubbering like an idiot. But I got it out. And it was amazing. I had a tribe again. I had a group of people that cared about me, that provided me with a place where I could go and tell my story. And I think, at least as importantly, a place where I could go and give other people a chance to do the same thing. And I think, as much as EMDR was a lifesaver for me, the biggest long-term help for me in terms of my recovery journey has been storytelling. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, in his storytelling workshop, he calls it the generosity of scars. And I thought, you cannot describe it any better than that. Being generous with your scars, telling your story in service to others. Because in telling your story, you are showing people who have been unable to tell their own story that they can get to a place where they can do that. And I can't tell you how profound the change has been. And the most profound change for me was a spiritual one. I was having a conversation with a guy that I had connected with on LinkedIn. His name is Matt Miller. And Matt Miller is a chaplain with the New York State Chaplains Task Force. And I was telling him my story. And he looked at me and said, you don't understand what you have, do you? And I'm kind of looking at him like, the cocked head, curious dog look. And he said, all that you've been through, you can use to help your brothers and sisters who are still back there in the dark. And people talk about God speaking to them. And God didn't speak to me out loud or in my head, but the Holy Spirit grabbed a hold of my heart and he said, listen to that man because he is speaking my calling to you. And I had what you would have to say was an epiphany. For the first time, I realized that God wasn't punishing me all those years. He was equipping me for a calling that at that very moment was revealed to me through Matt. And that is the purpose of my chapter in Wounds to Wisdom, is that your suffering has purpose. My very first pastor, when I was 17 years old, said, you can never be thankful for everything, but your faith teaches you to be thankful in everything. That God doesn't reveal his plan to you, but all you need to do is believe that it's a perfect plan. And so I think my message to anybody who is listening to this right now and is sitting alone in the dark is that you don't have to be sitting alone in the dark. There is a tribe for you out there. There is a place. Maybe it's this place, maybe it's this tribe, but there is a place where you can tell your story and heal. And when you come out the other side of that, and you can come out the other side, you will find what the purpose was behind your affliction, because there is one.
Oh, Chappie, what is your gift? When I see and feel your heartbreak, as you talk about the 6-year-old, I feel in my own heart the weight of the grief I think all of us carry, a heaviness that shuts us down, and it's an ache that almost lives deep, almost in our blood flow. It's a mixture of that shame, the loss. It's a mixture of everything. And the tears are what's waiting to come out to heal. And you're so spot on, Chappie. It's when we find that tribe. And the thing that always blew me away when I first started working with veterans is when they would say something like, I love you, brother. Because what we want to hear is another human being tell us they love us. Because most of us can be quite isolated. And in the general to and fro of our everyday relationship with people, we don't often use that word a lot. But also to look at another person and feel the weight of their story and their journey, and we call them brothers and sisters and the tribe, something really powerful happens. Chappie, you are a light, my friend. I mean, you are a brother, and you're a light for people to find their way out of that darkness. I know and before we get to Rich, I know if I had a dream, it would be one day, Sarah, we pull together a Words of the Wisdom retreat somewhere in the USA, and I get to hold all of you physically. And I can feel when I do that, it goes, oh, my heart's going, oh man, all this other grief is going to come out, and the tears will flow as we hold each other physically. And maybe one day that is a dream that can happen. We can make anything happen as long as we hold the possibility of a dream.
Amen.
But But Chappie, thank you, brother. And Rich, your journey from the wounds into your wisdom, what was that like for you, my friend?
Once I got that affirmation from that first therapist. Her name is Gail Davidoff. I'll never forget her. She used to come from Philadelphia down to Arlington, Virginia, a couple of times a week, and I would meet with her 6 o'clock in the morning. And yeah, it was. But when I first was introduced to Sarah, storytelling was I don't want to say this was strange because growing up in the environment I was in, if you started telling stories, people said, "Oh man, you're bragging, you're doing this, you're doing that," you know. So you didn't talk about it, and I had no idea at the time that by talking about it, I could help people, and that uh, really got me. In fact, on the I belong to this retired agents group, and they put in there that that I was one of the 29 authors in our book Words to Wisdom, and I had this agent reach out to me, and he said, "Oh my God, Rich," he says, I'm so glad you're still around." He said, "You know, I was always you were such a good person. You had a lot of wisdom. You always mentored people, and I'm glad that I was able to hook up with you again." And but then I have my frustration because I don't feel like I'm doing enough. You know, I tried to get a local paper here to uh, put an article in about the book and how uh, we recovered from our how we get out recovered from our trauma experience and turn that into something good for everyone. They weren't interested, so I said, okay, fine. I'll find somebody that wants to do it. But yeah, so I'm on the road. I'm on the road.
You are, brother. And it's I still can't get away. Like for all of us, our healing is like a puzzle, and I don't know, maybe it's just me, but there's a piece missing, and that piece is waiting for the physical contact. Because I think in that physical contact, the tears flow, and in the shared collection of those salty waters in the glass that it collects, in there is something even deeper and more powerful that adds to our healing. But for now, this is what we have. And for now, I personally feel I don't even remember how I found you, Sarah. It's like most of us. I don't know whether you, with a capital Y, we immortalizing you, Sarah, work in very mysterious ways. But how the hell did I get there from across the ocean? Benny, I don't even know how long I've been in the group. It feels like lifetimes at some point. Um, and so much has happened since that. I don't know, but I know that in this gathering and within this beautiful tribe that you have created, we are healing. And like Chappie and Rich, myself, it's a healing that will trail us till we breathe our last breath.
Mm,
It's I don't think it'll ever leave us, and neither do I think it should.
mm,
I think there's a wisdom and a gift in it, even though it can be God Almighty sore at times.
mm.
But it's a light of our humanity and our hearts that shine, and we feel the warmth of that and the power of that. Um, Scott, Sarah, Ulrich, I'd like to just cycle through you guys. Scott, my brother, what's coming up for you here?
I I think it was Rick. It was talking about seeing pattern, or maybe it was Sarah, seeing patterns here. And a pattern that I'm seeing is a pattern that I've seen in my life as well, in addition to the other stories. Barry, you mentioned that, there's a hole in people's hearts, right? It's a God-sized hole, and that's what's missing. But we don't know it when we're going through it. We think it's a personal thing, right? We think that, and sometimes it is, we all fall short, right? But wherever two or more are gathered, right? When you think about that biblically, what are we doing right now? There's six of us here, and we're together. We're forming bonds. We're sharing our stories. It's enlightening, again, to hear what other people have gone through. Um, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but I'm just going to do it. And listening to Chappie and Rich talk about going back to, them being younger and being a Marine, especially a younger Marine. I didn't want excuses from anybody. Didn't want to hear a story about, well, when I was a kid, I'm like, well, you're not a kid. You're an adult. Suck it up, right, Chappie? The suck it up part. And, so at the time, I thought that that was absolutely spot on. And sometimes it is, but holistically, it's not, right? And Chappie, I didn't understand the things that you came to understand until I was older. And it had to do with my dad too. My dad left when I was in fifth grade, and I grew to hate my dad. At least I thought I did, right? Because I was trying to cover for that absence. And it wasn't until much later in my life that everything came together, and it was through the wisdom of my grandfather. Uh, and and I won't go into details because it'll take too long. And some of you know, because I've told the story and it's in the book, that's part of my chapter, was the revelation that, yes, my dad did love me, and that he came to find God the last couple of years of his life, which led to him and I connecting and having him share with me things that I never knew and seeing him in a completely different light. How can that guy become this guy, the guy who finally had that God-sized hole in his heart filled? And if it wasn't for that, I can honestly say I don't know where I would be right now, because I could have absolutely gone down a very dark path because that hate was on my shoulders. It was a burden, because I felt betrayed, and I was very isolated as a young guy. And my mom, God bless her, she had been married 17 years, and he left, and so she was trying to start her life again. She had been a mom. She hadn't worked. She had to go find employment, minimum wage jobs, and so she was working and then going out. And so I spent a lot of time alone. And man, I just put that right back on my dad. And so anyhow, it's interesting how sometimes it takes a lifetime, and hopefully you can figure it out when you're younger, but sometimes it takes a lifetime for those puzzle pieces that Barry mentioned to start to fall into place. And for me, at least, I can absolutely say it's through the grace of God. I have no doubts. There have been a number of things that have happened in my life to show me that there is an author, and it is absolutely God at work. These people that come into our lives, you know, when you were talking about who introduced you to Sarah Chappie, I was doing this, not me, but there's someone up there uh, orchestrating certain things, right? When these people come into our lives, how do you think they get there?
Mm.
If we think it's all about coincidence, this world wasn't created by coincidence. There's too much math that has to come together in amazing ways for all of this to be here. So it's not by chance. And these people, these angels, for lack of a better word, I think they're inspired by God, and they see, and then they reach out and they say the right things. And look at the timing involved with these things too. The timing involved is incredible, because if it wasn't for the timing, they could be very different outcomes. So yeah, and the power of our story. That's the last thing I'll say. Yes, the power of our story. It matters.
Thanks, Scott. And I got to share, an unusual thing just happened to me as you were talking. I suddenly flipped back onto a phrase, and the phrase was Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And what that says is, in the beginning, God created the heaven and he created the earth. And I went, where the hell is that coming from? I speak Hebrew, so it's not, I wasn't channeling. But for me, it was when the earth was created, that is the grounding. Our feet are in the earth means we are in tribe. We are in the circle, and we've lost tribe over time. It's become fragmented. Families are fragmented. Our tribes are difficult to find. And the heavens are what we talk about. It's the light. It's our faith. And I see that I have no doubt how faith, as unconventional as mine might be coming from the 70s, but how faith has interwoven in my life to bring me where I need to be. I can see even all the stages of studying diverse things, falling into things by coincidence. I can see the pattern and the dance and the shape that it was building into and the picture it was painting. So I do know that when we have our faith, when we have our grounding on the earth in the presence of each other, then we truly begin to heal. We really do. Yeah, that was an odd thing that happened while you were talking, my brother.
Well, again, things happen for a reason, right?
They do, yeah. I'll be rattling off everything in Hebrew at this point and not know where it came from.
That's right. Well, if we all start understanding it, I'm going to freak out.
uh,
Uh,
Ulrika, I could see, Ulrika, you were kind of, pen was going wild. What was coming up for you as you faced these stories from these wonderful humans?
Um, I think I'm gonna choose this one part of the many scribble things that I scribbled down. I think I'm gonna add on to what you both said because that's the strongest one for me. And it comes back to the light. I feel even if I do believe there is no light without the darkness. There's no experience of the light without the darkness. And I think just these moments of like actually picking up this phone call from Brian, I think his name was, right? Um, to having this therapist send you away, to have this person on that day give you that touch on the arm. Um, and you, Chappie, you said it like this. You said there was like a complete darkness, and that was the first time like an ounce of light came through, right? And for me, it feels like this is the ultimate knowing that there is never just darkness. The light is all there behind it. And all you need is somehow something that manages to have this hole in the darkness to kind of give you an understanding, hey, there is still light out here. And I believe that if you are a believer in God, you will say this is a God's light. Other people would say that is the universe that has a light in you. But I believe that there is something in you that will always strive towards the light, and you are destined to get there. And I hope that in the moments where you cannot see it, we remember that we are the people that are able to bring a little hole into someone's darkness. And sometimes we don't even know it. So I think that is what came through for me the most, to say there is a trust that ultimately you're looking for the light. And sometimes if we cannot see it, hopefully we find the person who is able to put this little hole in the light. And it seems like in this group that in some capacity all were this for one another in the moments that we all met. I could definitely tell that I've at least had with two people moments where I felt some light that they've given me. And I'm pretty sure that you have the same experience. So that's my light thought.
Spot on, Ulrika. And all I can say is that I think for me to be in the presence of a tribe where their faith is so strong and their light is, you can feel the warmth of it, um, and that collection of being held and understood and loved is so powerful. It's so healing, and it's our doorway and it's our tribe and it's our grounding in the earth in which we will continue to do our work and hold each other till we breathe our last breath. And as you know, that was my story, the last breath in the book. How many last breaths do we have in our lives? Too many sometimes to actually to hold. Um, I just want to thank everybody. I know Sarah, Scott, any last thoughts before we do what needs
Yeah,
to be
I'll
done
jump in
today?
here real quick and let Sarah go last because I know Sarah's got something that's gonna be wonderful to hear. So it's probably best to end on that note. But uh, as sorry, there's a fire down the road here, and that's my warner or my alarm off the app that I use that tells me there's a fire down the road. But anyhow, uh, this whole light and darkness thing, right? And I was trying to remember what scripture it was, but it's John 1:5, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Or another reading is that the darkness did not overcome it, right? So I think both of those are pretty amazing, that the darkness didn't comprehend the light and it didn't overcome it. So, and it's interesting, Barry, that your backdrop today that you chose, you know, that's pretty cool.
Little
So
did I
I'll end it
know,
with,
little did I know. There we go. It's
yeah, amen.
yeah, amen to you too.
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
Sarah.
Um, I just um I feel gratitude when people just have the courage and the faith to just take a step forward. It's like that decision to make one courageous step forward into vulnerability and to maybe show up to a group or maybe be present to listen to somebody else's story. Kind of that presence of vulnerability. I don't think people who have not done that before, they don't realize how that one little choice, that one little step can be life-changing. It's just so I really appreciate the conversation because I feel like your stories and what you all shared of every angle. Ulrika, it's so great to have you here too. Um, I feel like you are an example of doing that and how all of your lives just seems to have blossomed in whatever direction you were meant to go in with that connection, the safety of connection and community. So thank you so much for that in you. And Barry and Scott, thank you so much for creating this group.
Well, Sarah, just, in the spirit of Ubuntu, we are only here because of who you are. That is your grace and that is your gift. And it goes beyond that, that we are all here together as a light that I hope people listening and who will eventually join this tribe more and more will find their healing. And you've planted a seed, and the seed is going to grow into a big tree, which I hope lives well, well past us, as the book did, and as I hope this tribe will continue to do. So I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude. And I don't mean a debt. Debt is a powerful heart-based thing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because we would not exist if it weren't for a dream that you had one day to start this.
Yeah.
Thank
She
you.
is, Sarah has made a lot of chaplains. And I don't mean that in terms of I'm a certified chaplain and that's what I do as a vocation. There is something that is at the core of the chaplaincy. If you ask any chaplain, what is the chaplaincy? And they will say the exact same thing. They call it a ministry of presence. That is what the chaplaincy is. And I think that we are all in some small way, chaplains, because we are called to be present for others. And I think that just really says what this tribe is all about. It's being present for one another.
Thanks, Chappie. I mean, this has been the most extraordinary. I don't think we've ever run one that has been 2 hours long. But I really want to thank everyone that Scott, you even turned up today. You know, I've missed you, and that this collection of the four of us gathering, it's just even the background. You know, that song. You know, I see my light come shining. I love that song from the 70s. I'll play it for you guys one of these days. Yeah, but just what a synchronicity of being brought together in the most unique way to share and touch each other's hearts, and I hope those that see it. So massive thanks to everybody. I think if we can stay on after we pause the recording and then just finish off. But thank you everybody for today. You really are gifts.